Hi, this is Burns Hargis for another edition of Inside OSU, and this is a very special edition because we have with us legendary journalist Tom Brokaw. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. Give just a quick synopsis of your background because I think our viewers will find a lot of connection.
Well, I grew up in small towns. My dad was a hard hat construction foreman, and we moved around a lot. All my friends and my family certainly say I had a lot of curiosity. I was kind of the town crier. I'd show up at school and tell everybody about what had happened overnight. I delivered newspapers, listened to the radio a lot. We didn't have television until I was 15. I guess most of my family members and my friends believed I was kind of born to do this. And as I came of age, network television news was also just coming of age. So it was a serendipitous confluence for me. This new medium, television, network news. And because it was new, they were reaching out for everybody they could find in the country. You didn't have to have a Yale or Harvard pedigree of some kind to go to work at Time Magazine or the New York Times.
You ended up graduating from South Dakota.
University of South Dakota. The cautionary tale for your students is that I went off the rails pretty seriously for a couple of years, and it was the most instructive thing that happened to me. I came out of high school whiz kid, thought I could do no wrong, and crashed and burned for about 2 years. Went to Omaha, got a job. My wife taught school, and then within 2 years I was in Atlanta anchoring the 11 o'clock news at the age of 25. Why they hired a 25-year-old Yankee to do the big station in Atlanta, I don't know.
Yeah.
But civil rights was breaking out all across the South. I was doing a lot of stories for Huntley Brinkley, and then NBC came to me very quickly and said, come to Los Angeles.
You had a front row seat for Watergate.
I did. I covered a lot of national politics, and I got to know the Nixon organization well because it was rooted in California. And then I went back to Washington in '73 to start covering Watergate.
To the White House.
To the White House. I was the White House correspondent, and that put me on the front lines of probably the single greatest political constitutional crisis in our country's history. The presidency was at stake. The president was accused of high crimes and misdemeanors. And it was a very tense time in this country. Wherever we go in the country, a lot of people were unhappy with the press for pursuing it as actively as we did. But looking back on it now, if that were going on now with cable television and the internet, the country would be aflame much more than it was then.
I'm going to fast forward a lot, unless you have something in the intervening period, but to 9/11. You were there for 9/11.
Yeah.
Would you describe that experience?
Well, it's the single hardest thing I've ever done. I was called at about 8:55 in the morning, and they said, get to the office right now. A small plane is at the World Trade Center. Didn't make sense.
And you're in New York.
I'm in New York. I lived in the city, and I rushed out the door, and as I raced across 81st Street, I heard sirens 2 blocks north of me, and it was from the firehouse that served our neighborhood, and almost all those people died. And of all the stories I've covered over the years, that one was the hardest because we had no idea what would happen in the next second. Right. You know, when you go to war, you generally have a warning, or when communism falls, you have a warning, or when there's an election, you have a warning. Here, we were playing without a net. And then at about 11:30 in the morning, I guess, a lot of my friends said they remembered me looking into the camera and saying, we're at war, this is going to change us. This is the most serious attack on our country, really since 1812, because Pearl Harbor was not yet a state at that time. And it went on like that for, the next 2 weeks. That's the single toughest story I ever did. But in the long reach of history, what happened on my watch was that communism collapsed. That's the big story of our time, that the Soviet Union went down, and the most lethal war in the history of mankind, the Cold War, ended without a shot being fired, without tanks rolling, without people being sent to gulags again. That's an extraordinary story, and it tells you how much times change, because when I got involved in television news, I was a real authority on the Soviet Union. I knew what kind of warheads they had and what megatonnage meant and who was in charge in the Politburo in those days. That's all gone. Now the world, we look more to China, we look more to India, more to Brazil.
The BRICS.
More to the BRICS and the economic explosion that is going on around the world. So it's a dynamic time.
Did you have any doubt about whether you ought to take the Today Show?
I did. I turned it down one time, actually. I was in the middle of Watergate and they wanted me to come up and do it. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they then came to me after Watergate and said, you've got to do it because we want you to be the nightly news anchor, but we need you to do this first. And I said, I have to do it on my own terms. So if you go back and look at how we did the Today Show in those days, it was a lot more serious coverage than they do now. And actually, it was very good for me personally. I met authors and Broadway stars and film stars and musicians I never would have met, and actually became friends with some of them as a result of that. So it was very good for me, and I did a lot of...
It broadened your audience a lot, too.
And I jumped on planes and flew to Rome when they shot the Pope, and I went to Egypt. I was there the next morning when Sadat was murdered, and I went on presidential trips. I was at the White House the morning after Ronald Reagan, the assassination attempt on him. But I knew it would come to an end. I was going to go off and be what I became.
If you're starting out in journalism today, and the myriad of platforms that you could access, what would you do?
Here's what I tell young students. First of all, there are that many jobs on the air. There are that many jobs behind the scenes, and are great jobs, producers and technicians and writers and all manner of people. So look at those as well as the jobs on the air. Jobs on the air don't have the kind of job security that the other jobs do as well. Learn to write, no matter how we do it, whether it's online or on the air or whether we just talk to somebody. You have to be able to express yourself in a coherent fashion. And now, plainly, there is a great opportunity in the digital revolution that is going on. You can be a guy in your underwear sitting in a basement and kind of start an online newspaper. Yeah. And a lot of them have, by the way.
Just self-publishing.
Right, and self-publishing books. So there are lots of opportunities. The difference between what's going on in the workforce and when I began is that now everyone wants to get into this business. When I began, I was the only one I knew from all of my contemporaries who went into television journalism. They all went to law school, or they went to work for IBM or for the big corporations. That's what our generation did. And they thought I had lost my mind because I went to work for very little money at a television station in Omaha, working 6 days a week, long hours. But it was very exciting, very exhilarating. And so I loved it. And journalism still has that appeal.
You're also an acclaimed author with, I guess, The Greatest Generation, your book, The Greatest Generation, being the pinnacle of that so far. You're working on a...
I don't think I can top that, actually.
Kennedy assassination...
documentary, actually.
Well,
it's going to be a book and a documentary.
Yeah. And are you going to do a book, kind of a Walter Cronkite reflection book? No. Why not?
Well, because I think journalists think that they're very important and all of their stories are wildly amusing, and I don't think so. I have a lot of stories, and my friends all say to me at the end of a long airplane ride, you got to put that in a book. I mean, that story about Reagan or Gorbachev or being where you were and something happened, I said, it's great verbally, it just doesn't translate, and we all think we're the most fascinating people in the world. That comes with the hubris of being a journalist.
Right. Well, as a fan of yours all these many years, I'm kind of a political junkie, and so I've enjoyed, of course, your leadership at Meet the Press and all of the other things that you've done through the years. And in my book, you belong with the greatest generation.
Well, thank you.
Thanks,
That's
Tom.
very nice.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
That's another edition of Inside OSU, a very special one indeed. We'll see you next time.